This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. My next guest is one of the founding members of the biggest rock band of the 80s, according to Classic Rock magazine. Dire Straits has sold up to 120 million records, received Grammys, Brit Awards and MTV Awards, and also helped fashion the MTV generation. John Illsley, the bass guitarist for Dire Straits, was one of the four brothers and friends, I guess you could call them brothers in arms, that decided to form a little band in 1977. They hit the UK rock scene with an album that would go on to launch the career of one of the most influential and important bands of the history of music. Originally known as Cafe Racers, the band thankfully adopted the name Dire Straits, and a tour with Talking Heads and a top 10 single, Sultans of Swing, started their journey. Now a successful solo artist, multiple Brit and Grammy Awards, and painter, I might add, John Illsley is now part of a new single called Think Loud, a song to bring awareness to Parkinson's disease. To chat about this and his own journey, John Illsley from Dire Straits joins Long Way to the Top. John Illsley, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Can I go now after all that?
Yeah, that's I like to do that just to set the scene, and we've run out of time.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you for having me on. I mean, it's an important moment, I think, for Parkinson's. So it's good that we've managed to get this together.
Yeah. And look, we're going to talk about that because obviously, everybody involved in this is involved for their own reason, for one thing or another. So would love to get to that. But I'd like to start off with sort of the early days. And I guess the early days of Dire Straits. And given the fact this is Long Way to the Top, you seem to sort of come out of nowhere and suddenly there was Dire Straits, but I guess that wasn't the case.
Well, we've all got to come from somewhere, and I think that the somewhere for us was a sequence of coincidences. I was living in this council flat in South London. I was a student at Goldsmiths College doing sociology, and I needed a flatmate, and David Knopfler turned up on the doorstep with a guitar to be my flatmate. And then Mark Knopfler joined, of course, a little later. And so we found ourselves as musicians living sort of together. And, we've discovered that we share the same interest in music. So I see life really as a series of consequences, which puts us in a situation where things can happen. We'd all been playing music for a long time. I started when I was sort of 15, and Mark was the same. And so, it was just a question of putting all that sort of those histrionics of music together and finding some mutual ground.
What was your inspiration for picking up that bass when you were 15?
Well, I picked the bass up originally. Like most bass players, we end up playing the bass because they won't let us play the guitar in the band.
You're playing second fiddle.
Or in Bill Wyman's case, apparently he was the one with the amplifier. So, we all end up sort of in these situations almost accidentally. But I found that when I played the guitar, obviously I still play the guitar now. I write on the guitar most of the time. But I picked the guitar up because I got inspired by hearing, in the very early 60s, when I was about 12 or 13, I discovered Elvis Presley and the Beatles and the Stones and what else was going on then, and a lot of the blues stuff. And I just wanted to be part of it. So that's where my inspiration started. I felt something by being involved in music, especially what was then, I suppose you would call it pop music, but in fact, actually, most of it had its roots in blues music. And gospel in the case of Elvis. So
Yeah.
all these things come into your senses and made me feel different.
And there's also, I mean, you've got elements of that within Dire Straits as well, within your recordings, like, recordings like Twisting by the Pool, throwback to those early days of rock and roll, the days of the 60s.
Well, I don't think you ever lose that. Those influences, they sort of seep into your being, and then they sort of seep out onto your fingers, onto the fretboard or onto the piano. And you never really, it's just a question of really, with songwriting and writing songs and being involved in a band, it's a question of what feels right at the time, what works right at the time. So it could be a blues song, or it could be something like Twisting by the Pool. And it's all, a lot of it is rooted in early rock and roll.
Yeah.
And I always say that we're basically a rock and roll band that just got, which got fortunate of having a very good writer in the band who took it to another dimension.
Yeah.
So that's really, I don't think you ever lose those early influences.
Yes.
Even now, when I pick the guitar up, I start playing sort of 12-bar blues just to get myself going.
When the first singles were being recorded, and songs like Sultans of Swing, did you know at the time? I mean, like deep down, did you go, "Oh man, this is going to be a hit," or was it just like, "Oh, let's see how it goes"?
Well, people outside of the band decided it was going to be a hit. I don't think we really knew at the time. I think that we were aware of every time we played it in those small pubs and clubs in London in the late 70s, that this song seemed to excite people a bit more than other songs. And then, of course, it became this, sort of rather special part of the band's armory, and was to the end. I mean, it's a classic bit of sort of rock and roll writing. It's just a story really about rock and roll bands playing in pubs, and which we've all done, and everybody can relate to that, I think. You never know when you're recording a song how it's going to go. I mean, you think, well, that's a good one, but the public decides, the listeners decide what they're going to, which box they're going to tick on that one. I think.
Yeah, well, they definitely decided there. Now, I heard a rumor that possibly Dire Straits' name came out of the fact that you'd all, were in Dire Straits because you weren't working. Is that just fiction, or?
Well, it seemed appropriate at the time. I mean, we were living in this very simple council flat with not really much money. I think Mark was the only one really who kind of had a job. He was a lecturer at an English lecturer at a college in Essex. But the rest of us, I was living on the students' fees, at the time, and David was he was working as a social worker. He wasn't earning much money, and Pick really was. I think the name came originally from a mate of Pick's who said to him, "Well, you've been in music all your life and you've never made any money, so why don't you call your band Dire Straits? Because that's your state of being right now, and it's been like that for a long time." And so Pick turned up one day with this name, and we went, that seems to suit the situation quite well. We only had one armchair in what we called the sitting room as such, because there was only one chair in it. So I suppose it was quite appropriate at the time.
So, obviously you went on tour with, with Talking Heads, and then the single took off, and then the early 80s came and the MTV generation hit, and your single Money for Nothing, you did a video with the two computer characters. Who came up with the idea of that, and did they know at the time what was actually happening with the whole MTV thing? Because that became huge.
Yeah, MTV I think was quite big in the States, and it had sort of just arrived in Europe. I think, at that particular point in time. And the song originally came out of a visit that Mark made to a white goods store in New York when he was fixing up the house he was living in with his then wife, girlfriend, Lourdes. and he was in there and he listened to all these guys who worked in the shop talking about what was going on the screen, because there's all these TV screens in this white goods store which was playing MTV, and they would, all the comments that these guys were making about the people on the screens was very appropriate and very funny. So Mark found himself scribbling these things there. Well, that ain't working. That's the way you do it. That's money for nothing. That's they get all the girls for free, the chicks for free, and everything. And so he sort of he stole all these ideas from these guys, rapping on about whoever was on the TV at the time. I can't remember who it was, and that became money for nothing. And of course, it reflected that whole generation of how music was being shown to us around the world. And the idea of the video came actually from Steve Barron, who was a sort of, I think he was a commercials director at the time, and he's still around now. And he came up with this idea of making the video using modern computer graphics, which of course we were now entering the digital age big time. So it was his idea originally how to put that thing together. He said, just use these sort of digital, these computer generated characters to tell the story.
I mean, we look at it now, it looks like Microsoft Paint, right?
It looks pretty simple, but at the time it was completely revolutionary when you think about it. It was nearly 40 years ago.
Yeah, wow.
And of course, it was really taking the mickey a little bit out of MTV, and but of course, I don't think the Americans really picked up the sort of ironic nature of the situation. So they put it on heavy rotation, which of course had the most remarkable effect on the record, and the Brothers in Arms album,
and the tour that followed. I mean, you did a very extensive tour. I think 1986. That was pretty much, you called Australia home for 3 months.
Oh, we had such a wonderful time in Australia. My goodness me.
17 cities.
That's got to have been one of the very high points of any of our time, in the band, was playing in Australia and virtually doing a residency in the Sydney Entertainment Centre and the Melbourne Entertainment Centre. I mean, it was just incredible. Yeah. And going up that coastline to Mackay and, oh goodness me, Cairns and places.
Yes, Rockhampton. I was actually from Rockhampton at the time, and yes, it was. Yeah.
I mean, and we went to Darwin to do a gig, and I think there were more people in the audience than actually lived in Darwin. Apparently, they'd all flown in from all. Anyway, it was a really amazing time for us, and the Australians sort of embraced us rather wonderfully, actually.
And of course, in true MTV style, I think it was also broadcast on TV at the very end. Maybe it was a Sydney concert. Yeah,
it was. Thank God we didn't make any mistakes. Well, nobody noticed.
So, fast forwarding on, what was the end of Dire Straits? I mean, how did you know that it was time? And I guess also importantly, did you all leave friends?
Well, I think everything comes to a head at one point, and you think, I think we've done what we can with this vehicle, this musical vehicle, and it had become as big as we thought it could ever be, which I think was, especially the last tour after the On Every Street album came out, and I can't remember how many dates it was 240 or 250 dates in a year and a half or something, which when you say it quickly, it sort of doesn't sound like much, but these days people complain about going on the road for 30 days. Well, I mean, that's rehearsals. That was just rehearsals. So one thing, it was exhausting, mentally and physically, but also I think we realized that everybody was kind of reached a point where they probably wanted to do something else. And Mark particularly was definitely being pulled in different directions. And I could recognize that very much so. In fact, I thought we'd probably done what we'd done after Brothers in Arms. So I was quite surprised when he and I were having lunch one day, and he said, "I've got some songs which I think the Straits should do. Do you fancy making another album?" So that was the On Every Street album and the big tour. And I think, he and I decided, pretty much towards the end of that was it, really.
Yeah.
We've stayed friends ever since, thankfully, and I'm very grateful for that. And I still see the other guys from time to time. So,
Yeah.
we did finish on good terms, and although we were very tired, we all needed a break. I think
Yes.
quite a big
Yes.
break, and that's when
Yeah.
I started painting. I got into painting to fill that sort of gap, that void that opened up, of course, when you stop doing something you've been doing pretty consistently for 17 or 18 years.
Now, painting, I mean, like that's actually something that it's amazing how many musicians that I talk to where they also paint. David Bowie himself was a painter. I'd love to have spoken to David Bowie, but he was a painter. I spoke to the Church, Steve Kilbey. He paints as well. I mean, is it just a way of just winding and forgetting about everything?
I think it's just another form of communication. I mean, music's a very strong form of communication. Painting is in some ways much more intense because it's just you on your own.
Yeah.
With music, it's a group activity. Well, for us, it was. And I think that this form of communication in painting is a different way of expressing yourself. In some ways, it touches areas which you probably don't get when you're writing songs or playing music. I find it very therapeutic, but I do it in fits and spurts. I can't do it all the time like some people. I have to sort of get away from it because it's actually quite draining when you're trying to get an exhibition together and stuff like that. So I go into it with a lot. I have to be right for it. I've done some painting here in France, so I keep a little studio here where I can work, and
Nice.
so it's something which is very important to me. And I think it does reflect. Like music, a very important element of our culture.
Who's your inspiration for art?
Yeah, who?
Yeah, who inspires you with art?
Well, the one person that really made me take it seriously was one of your painters, Brett Whiteley.
Oh, really? Wow. Yes, incredible painter.
Brett, I met Brett in 1982 when we came over on the Love Over Gold tour.
Yeah.
And we became very close. He was it was as you know, he was an extremely unusual man, very strange in the way he saw the world, and I liked that, and we got on very well. He loved music. He's followed us. When we came over, he would make contact with us all the time, and so we became very close. And I got very inspired by what he was doing. I didn't know who he was from a loaf of bread when he rang me up at the Siebel Townhouse in Sydney, and he said, "Do you want to come and look at some pictures, John?" And I went, "Yeah, okay."
I could be getting into anything here.
Well, and I went around to his old studio in Circular Quay, which he had. It was called the Gasworks or something before he moved to the other one, and I walked into this room and realized I was in the presence of a master, who I'd never heard of, and I still think he's probably one of your best artistic exports. There's no doubt about it. I do own quite a few Brett Whiteleys, which I'm very, very fond of, and every time I walk past them, I get a sense of him in my world again. And we had some great times together. And I never shared a needle with him. I must say that with you, because he did have some rather bad habits.
Yes, and sadly, I think that was part of the whole demise. But I guess it's like anything. It's like when someone is as brilliant as him, it comes with vices.
Well, he got drawn into this idea that in order to produce remarkable work, he had to go into a different space, and the way that he went into that space was by, using narcotics, and of course we all know that's a hiding to nowhere eventually. nobody really gets away with that. And so you're really dancing with the devil. And I think that he just found it very, very difficult to lead a sort of, dare I say, a normal life, because he wasn't normal. He wasn't, the most extraordinary person I've ever met, actually.
Yeah.
And I miss him. I miss him greatly. And I'd loved, Steph, my wife, to have met him. She would have loved him. And such a great and a very unusual character, wonderful man. Man.
Yeah, incredible.
So he was my inspiration.
He was your inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this may be a loaded question, but we touched on it earlier with regards to bass playing, that originally you started out as a guitarist, but, being a good bass guitarist is an art, very, very much so. I mean, what makes a good bass guitarist, in your opinion? How long have I got?
No, I will put it very simply, actually. I mean, I approached the song in order for the bass to actually make that song better, in simplistic terms, not to show off, but to make that song work in the way that I think it should work. So that's when Mark and I were working together. I would really keep it very, very simple in order for the music to breathe, because that's what I felt the music did. The music wanted it seemed to me to be. I didn't want to fill all the holes in. You know what I mean? I hear bass players and they can't stop themselves. But the best ones, I mean, McCartney's a fantastic bass player, part of being quite a good songwriter. And you listen to the bass lines McCartney puts in, and sometimes he's just playing the root note. He's not doing anything else. He's doing what's necessary. And I think that's really, to me, that's the essence of, of good bass playing, is to keep it simple. John McVie from Fleetwood Mac, wonderful bass player.
Incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. I mean, you go and watch Jaco Pastorius when he was alive, and it was like, how is he doing that?
Yeah.
But it suited what he was doing with the weather reports. So everybody does things differently, but for me, it's helping the song to come more alive by keeping it simple.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, nice. So you've now solo. You've got I think you just put out an album last year, Life and Times of Dire Straits. Been on a bit of a tour, and now you've started. You actually worked with a bunch of incredible musicians to create this song, Think Loud. How did that come about?
Yes, go back a bit. Just to correct you, actually, my last album that I did was my last solo album, which was called 8.
Right. Oh, I thought you did Life and Times of Dire Straits, like an acoustic album.
That was a DVD. Actually, there was an album of that as well, actually. But the last one, is 8, because it's my 8th solo album. So
8 solo albums.
That's the context of it. But anyway, to move along, to Think Loud. Yes, well, I was approached by Josh Phillips, who I think you've spoken to.
Yes.
Through a mutual friend called John Corcott, who is a great motivator of many things. And Josh was looking around for people to get onto this project. And I've known John for a while, and I've done a few things with him musically, and he said, well, give me a call. And so he did. And we had lunch together, and he talked about the project. And I said, well, it's actually very close to my heart, this subject, because my sister, Pat, has had Parkinson's for 25 years. And she's now 77.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty well acquainted with this particular disease, I suppose you would call it disease.
Can you talk us through what effect it has on people, for those who may not have experienced it, which it would be unusual because it does touch a lot of people?
Yeah, it's a bit of a slow burner, this one. When my sister Pat got it, there was just slight bit of shaking, and then there was more movements and stuff, and you can get stuff to calm that down. But gradually over the years, over the 25 years that I've known her, the movements have got less exaggerated. She's become more immobile.
Mm.
It's very difficult now to actually understand what she's saying. So I have to have a Zoom like this with her in order to read her lips and see what she's saying. It helps me to understand what she's saying. So she is in quite a long way down the track. It's a bit of a slow burner, this one, and I think it affects people in different ways. There's no doubt about it. She's had the deep brain stimulator, which helped a bit. She's had pretty much everything. She's on different drugs all the time, and there's new drugs coming along, as we know. But it's a really difficult thing to deal with. And she's now sort of chair-bound, and she has 24-hour care, but a lot of care coming into the house.
Yeah.
In order to look after her. So it's a miserable thing, but a lot of people get it when they're older. So if you get it in your 70s, you're probably going to die of something else.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you die of Parkinson's, you die of related other things in your system which break down.
Yes.
Amazingly, she's so incredibly strong. I'm completely knocked out by how she's so determined to try and live a life and go to church, and she goes visiting friends and people come in. I mean, she's really makes a big effort, but it's damn difficult.
Yeah. Do they know what causes Parkinson's disease?
Oh gosh, I think if they knew what caused it, they'd probably have a solution for it. I think that's one of the problems. It's very complicated. I'm afraid it's slightly beyond me to try and explain it, but I took her to see a new neurologist in London recently, who says there's different things coming along which might help more. Yeah. But it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And one of the most major things that's happened, though, actually recently, I think Joe Biden in the States announced not very long ago that they were going to find a cure for Parkinson's as soon as possible, which when America says something like that, then they're going to throw a lot at it, because obviously it's becoming more prevalent. I mean, more and more people seem to be getting it now, whether this is something to do with the way that we run the world, with farming and pollution.
What are we eating? What are we drinking? Yeah.
We don't know. I think there's a lot of people are talking about all those different elements coming to play on these neurotransmitters in the brain and how it affects people.
Yes.
But there is a fantastic international group of people now that share everything. And the latest thing that's come out, I mean, I say this quite funny, but they found that certain kinds of cough mixture apparently has some effect on it. Now, this is very odd. I find the name of it is, what is it called? Ambroxol. Ambroxol, which is a cough mixture that they found actually helps Parkinson. Now, I don't know how it helps them. I don't know if this is a new thing or not, but so things are coming on all the time.
Yes.
And because of this, now there's this international approach to it. I think they're probably going to not solve it completely, but certainly understand it more within the next 3 or 4 years, which will be fantastic.
I think we've definitely come a long way. I was talking with an oncologist who is looking at doing a podcast, and he was saying that given the fact that he's in the cancer field, that he now has clients that he's worked with them for 25 years managing their cancer, and it's become more of a management program now than oh well, sorry, but you've only got X amount to live.
Yeah. I think that's very true, and I think that that we are making tremendous moves in all sorts of all sorts of medical fields in order to manage these things which we thought were unmanageable. And I think people who get Parkinson's now will probably be able to live a better life than people who got it 20, 30 years ago.
Yes,
without doubt. But to go back to the music we did, I mean, that's the reason why I was very interested in getting involved, and I met Josh and we got on very well. Thoroughly nice man, and so he just said, would you play the bass on this thing? And I said, well, send it to me. My son-in-law lives down the road with a studio, so I went in there and did my bit for it.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's got the incredible UK slash adopted Aussie Leo Sayer singing it.
Wonderful. I mean, he just literally picked it up and ran with it. I mean, just like that. Yeah, and I think they asked a few more people, but there was sometimes there wasn't enough time to get more people involved. But I think they did a fantastic job, and it's out now, and it sounds pretty good to me. I mean, it was a bit of a rush job, but there's some good people on there, and hats off to them.
I think really this sort of project, and I guess it's the same with anything. I mean, you were involved with Live Aid way back in the day too. Any project like this where musicians can get together and put out something that will benefit society like this.
Well, it's certainly an attempt. It's certainly an attempt to do that. I think they realised that with Live Aid, they realised the power of music, how influential that could be on a global scale.
Yes,
I think it surprised everybody. But when you met Bob Geldof, he wasn't going to take no for an answer. Yeah.
So you need to get Bob Geldof involved with Think Loud, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he's probably had enough of trying to change the world. I don't know. But anyway, so I mean, yes, I think these things do have the ability to do that, or create a situation where people's attention is drawn to a problem.
Yeah,
and I think everybody's realised that done properly, it has a good, strong chance of helping change things.
Now, as we finish up, what's next for you, John? Have you got any solo projects in the works, or?
Well, I've got a few gigs this year. I've cut back this year because I had a book out, which actually you might have seen in Australia.
My Life in Dire Straits.
So that kept me busy during lockdown and after lockdown, because I didn't realise that when you write a book, that's just the start of it. Then you've got to talk to people about it endlessly. So I found myself getting bored with my own repetitive answers and stuff. But anyway, that came out, and I spent a lot of time pushing that along. And then I had the album come out, 8. So I've done quite a lot of work with that, touring and such like, and talking to people. So I've been pretty busy. And this year is a bit calmer this year. I actually decided to do less. I'm doing a few festivals here. And hopefully I might get one together in Greece at some point. We are looking at trying to come over and play in Australia, actually.
That would be fantastic. Yes.
Early next year, if we can get it together. So that's on the cards as well. So I'm usually always doing something. I mean, either painting or trying to put a few words together which make any sense, and a few tunes. But that's really, what I do most of the time now.
Well, when you come to Australia, make sure you visit Tasmania. We're very similar climate to England, so you'll feel right at home.
That's a shame.
And just to finish up, I ask this of everyone: what are you currently listening to right now on? If it's vinyl, or if it's not.
Oh my God! I mean, I'm so terribly boring in this respect. I still listen to, J.J. Cale and Bob Dylan and Van Morrison and Leonard Cohen. And
why not?
These are my go-to. These are my go-to places when I'm painting. That's what I find. I find it very stimulating. I listen to quite a bit of classical stuff as well. Because that helps me look at the painting in a different kind of way from time to time. But it varies. I do somewhat rely on my children my younger children to bring things to me, and they keep going on raving about Fred again. I don't know whether you've heard of Fred again.
Fred again? No, I'll have to check. I'll have to check Fred again out. I thought you were going to say someone like Harry Styles, or
Well, I do believe my wife and daughter have got tickets for Harry Styles.
Oh, nice.
Have you? Oh, she has got. She's just told me she has got tickets for Harry Styles.
There
I
you
wasn't
go.
invited for some strange reason, but anyway.
Ah,
Um, yeah, no, I mean, there's there's a lot of very talented people out there
there is.
still, which is wonderful. Music
Yeah.
just keeps producing people who want to write songs and perform. It's a wonderful world.
Wonderful world. John, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Really appreciate chatting with you.
It's a pleasure. Nice to talk to you, Shane.
Thanks, John. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Long Way to the Top. Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast and head over to Facebook at the Long Way to the Top podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.